1953, a young man mailed a postcard to his parents, but it never arrived. For 72 years it was lost, hidden somewhere in silence. Then one day it suddenly reappeared. What message did it carry? And why now, after 7 decades? The year was 1953. The United States was still finding its rhythm. After the long shadows of World War II, families worked hard, neighborhoods were quiet, and letters remained the most trusted way to send words across distance. On a warm summer day, a young man named Alan Ball prepared to send a small postcard to his parents, Frederick and Elizabeth Ball. It was not a long message, just a son's way of saying, "I'm here, I'm safe, and I'm thinking of you." The postcard itself carried an image of the United Nations building in New York City, a modern symbol of hope, still fresh in the memory of the world. Alan slipped the card into his pocket while he traveled, taking a short stop in New York before heading toward Puerto Rico. He had no idea that this small piece of paper, no bigger than the palm of his hand, would become part of one of the strangest postal mysteries in American history. He walked to a mailbox on the busy New York street, surrounded by honking cars, men in hats, and women rushing past in dresses and heels. Pausing for a moment, he looked at the card. His handwriting was neat, his words simple. He slid the postcard through the narrow slot of the mailbox. With a metallic clink, it disappeared into the darkness. For Alan, that was the end of it. He continued his journey, certain that his parents would soon receive his words. But days passed, then weeks. Frederick and Elizabeth waited, checking their mail with quiet anticipation. No postcard came. Perhaps it was delayed, they thought. Perhaps it was lost among thousands of envelopes. But as the weeks turned into months, the card never appeared. Eventually it was forgotten. Life moved on. Letters came and went. But that one postcard, the one with the United Nations on its front, had vanished. No one could explain what happened. Had it slipped behind a shelf? Was it lost in a train station? Or had it been trapped in some forgotten corner of the massive postal system? For the Ball family, the mystery faded into memory. They never knew that the postcard still existed, waiting silently for decades. Hidden in the shadows of history, it slept, until the day it would reappear and astonish them all. After Alan Ball dropped his postcard into the New York mailbox in 1953, he thought no more of it. Life moved forward. He traveled, worked, aged, and built his own path. Back in Kansas, his parents, Frederick and Elizabeth, eventually stopped waiting for the card that never came. In a world without instant messaging, every letter mattered, but sometimes they also disappeared. They believed this was just one of those quiet losses never to be explained. Years turned into decades. The United States changed. Presidents came and went. The Cold War rose and fell. Men walked on the moon. Computers entered homes. The world moved into a new millennium. And yet, somewhere, hidden deep in the vast machinery of the postal system, Alan's postcard still existed. Was it stuck in a dusty corner of a sorting room, tucked between the gears of a machine, or perhaps it slipped behind a drawer in the United Nations post office? Lying there in silence as history thundered past, no one could say. By the time the postcard finally resurfaced, more than 7 decades had passed. Alan himself was no longer the young traveler who had written it. He was now an 88-year-old man, living quietly in the state of Idaho. His parents were long gone. His own memory of writing the card had faded, buried under the weight of years. Then, in a small post office in Ottawa, Kansas, a routine day turned into something extraordinary. A single old postcard appeared, weathered by time but still intact. Its front showed the same image of the United Nations building, frozen in 1950s ink and color. On the back, the words in Alan's handwriting were still visible, carrying across 72 years like a voice from another lifetime. The local Postmaster Mark Thompson stared at it in disbelief. Where had it come from? Why had it surfaced now after so long? He knew he had uncovered a mystery worth solving, and he was determined to track down the man who had written it all those years ago. The story of the lost postcard was about to come alive. It was just another ordinary day at the Ottawa post office in Kansas. Letters and parcels moved across counters as they always did. But for Postmaster Mark Thompson, a single, unusual item stood out among the routine deliveries. It was a postcard. Not just any postcard. but one that looked as though it had been frozen in time. Its edges were yellowed, its ink faded, yet the picture on the front still showed the proud United Nations headquarters. In New York, on the back, there were words written in neat handwriting, signed by a man named Alan Ball, and dated 1953. Mark knew immediately that something was different. How could such an old card suddenly appear here, as if it had traveled through a time machine? Curiosity sparked. Mark carefully examined the postmarks and details. It didn't make sense. The card looked genuine, but there was no modern trace of its journey. It had somehow slipped through the cracks of history, wandering unseen for 72 years, only to land on his desk that morning. Instead of simply filing it away as lost mail, Mark felt compelled to investigate. He couldn't ignore it. This was more than just a postcard. This was a story, a mystery waiting to be solved. Mark reached out to local genealogists, experts who could help trace the name Alan Ball. Slowly, through patient research, they pieced together fragments of a life. Alan was still alive. He was 88 years old, now living quietly in Idaho. Mark could hardly believe it. The man who had written this forgotten card more than 7 decades earlier was still here, still breathing, still part of this world. With growing excitement, the postmaster prepared to reach out. He wanted Alan to see what time and fate had preserved. When Alan was finally shown a digital image of his postcard, he was stunned. At first, he could barely recognize it. "I don't even remember writing it," he admitted softly. But then, studying the handwriting, he smiled faintly. "Yes, that's mine. That's me." For a moment, the years melted away. An old man was reunited with the voice of his younger self, carried across 72 years by a simple piece of paper. The rediscovery of Alan's postcard had become more than a curiosity. It was a reminder that history never truly disappears. Sometimes it only waits. When the call finally reached Alan Ball in Idaho, he was taken by surprise. An 88-year-old man living a quiet life. Alan never expected that a piece of his youth, long vanished, would return to him in such a strange way. The genealogist who tracked him down explained patiently, "Mr. Ball, we found a postcard. A postcard you wrote in 1953. It was addressed to your parents, Frederick and Elizabeth, but it never arrived. Until now." Alan was puzzled at first. A postcard from me? That long ago? Then, for the first time in 72 years, Alan saw the digital scan of the card. The handwriting stared back at him like a reflection from the past. His own young hand, his own youthful words frozen in faded ink. He leaned closer. His eyes softened, and suddenly recognition struck. "That's my writing," Alan whispered. "That's me, but I can't even remember sending it." He laughed faintly, shaking his head in disbelief. And then the memories began to stir. The summer of 1953, trip to Puerto Rico, a brief stopover in New York City. He remembered walking past the shining new United Nations headquarters, a symbol of hope for a post-war world. Perhaps in that moment he bought the postcard and wrote a note to his parents. Perhaps he mailed it with a casual flick of his hand, never imagining that it would vanish for a lifetime. Now 7 decades later it had returned. It was more than paper. It was a message from his younger self, a boy of 16, full of life and possibility, reaching out across the gulf of time. Alan smiled gently. "I don't remember sending it," he repeated, "but I know I did." For the Postmaster Mark Thompson, the moment was powerful. For Alan, it was deeply personal. The postcard was proof that the past never truly disappears. Sometimes it only takes the long road home. The next question was obvious. Where had the postcard been hiding for 72 long years? Postmaster Mark Thompson leaned into the investigation like a detective on a trail. To him, this was not just a misplaced letter. It was a puzzle that demanded solving. The postcard itself held a clue. On its front was a vivid image of the United Nations headquarters in New York City. A modern marvel at the time, that detail sparked an idea. Perhaps the postcard had been lost, not on its way to Kansas, but right there in New York, at the UN's own post office. Mark explained. Back in the 1950s, the postal system wasn't as tightly tracked as it is today. It's very possible that Alan's postcard slipped into a hidden corner, a drawer, a crack in the sorting machinery, or even a misplaced storage box, and was simply forgotten. Imagine it. A tiny card carrying a boy's words to his parents, swallowed by the gears of time. For decades, while wars were fought, presidents came and went and entire generations grew up. That postcard sat silently in the shadows, unseen, untouched, and then, for reasons no one could fully explain, it resurfaced. Perhaps during a cleaning, perhaps when old files or equipment were moved, perhaps by pure accident. Whatever the cause, the postcard finally made its way back into circulation, traveling across the United States postal network until it landed, astonishingly, in the Ottawa, Kansas post office, exactly where it had been meant to arrive all those years ago. For Mark Thompson, this was more than a curiosity. It was a reminder of the resilience of stories, of how even the smallest fragments of history can survive against all odds. He said later, "This postcard is a survivor. It waited 72 years to be delivered, and in the end it found its way home." When Alan Ball, now an 88-year-old man, was shown the postcard, he stared at it in disbelief. The handwriting on a shaky but familiar mar was undeniably his own. But here was the twist. Alan had no memory of ever writing it. "I recognize my handwriting," he admitted softly, "but I don't remember sending it. What I do remember is the summer of 1953, when I passed through New York City on my way to Puerto Rico. I must have bought that postcard then." It was as if the card had preserved a memory that Alan himself had lost. His parents, to whom the postcard was addressed, were long gone. The message he had intended for them would never be read by their eyes. And yet, after 72 years, it arrived, like a whisper from the past. The people of Ottawa, Kansas were moved. Neighbors, friends, even strangers felt the weight of the story. It wasn't just about a postcard anymore. It was about time, memory, and the fragile threads that tie us to one another. Think about it. A simple piece of paper had traveled through 7 decades. It had survived dust, neglect, and silence. And when it finally reappeared, it carried with it a sense of wonder, mystery, and hope. For Alan, the postcard became more than just an artifact. It was proof that fragments of our lives, even ones we forget, can resurface in the most unexpected ways. As the story spread across America, headlines called it a 72-year journey of a missing letter. People shared it, amazed that in an age of instant communication, a postcard from 1953 could still make people stop and feel something real. In the end, the postcard wasn't just delivered to a mailbox. It was delivered to all of us, as a reminder that history has a way of circling back, that our words outlive us, and that sometimes, even after a lifetime, the past finds its way home. Thanks you for watch. Every old story holds a lesson worth remembering. If you enjoyed this one, subscribe for watch and listen more old times, real stories, and don't forget,